Good evening. I call this meeting to order. It is 6:20 p.m. Tonight we have Directors Tytler, DeFreitas, Ramirez, After, and myself present, meaning we have a quorum. Thank you to our interpreter. Would you please share the interpretation instructions with our participants, and then we can turn on the interpretation function. Thank you. The first business in order is the approval of the agenda. Directors, are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Directors, you've just approved the agenda for tonight's meeting. Our next agenda item is our opening celebrations and updates by our interim superintendent, Dr. Cole.
Great. Good evening, everyone. A couple of celebrations and just information to share. At the starting, we're really delighted to celebrate that at the end of the first semester in December, which closed in December, we are both our attendance and our discipline numbers are showing increases over last year, are looking better than last year. Discipline data is down and attendance is up. So our year-to-date average daily attendance was almost 94% compared to about 90.5% with a year-to-date as of December 2022. So we're really seeing some increases there, and it's a real testament to the collective efforts of our attendance plan, the work on the ground. Every school is leaning in, really increasing strategies, data management, communication, checking in with students, following up with parents, sending out reminders, and really increasing awareness. And it seems to be having a really positive impact that we're trending in a great direction. A lot of thanks to Chief Park and for her leadership on this work and coordination and keeping energy behind the work. Just as a reminder, our goal as a district is to achieve a 95% average daily attendance rate by the end of the year. So we're headed in the right direction. Just want to make sure to remind board directors and our community that we have a couple of upcoming community input sessions to really discuss, to provide some education and hear from our communities about the presence, use, abuse, and transmission of drugs like cocaine, opioids, fentanyl at our high schools. So we really are taking a lot of efforts to escalate our prevention, education, intervention, and enforcement strategies. We really need our community support and engagement at these upcoming forums to talk about what's working, what we're missing, and we want to consider in collaboration with our community strategies that maybe we're not utilizing or could utilize differently, including canine drug detection units, additional family education opportunities, increased SRO presence, and we want to talk about, our decision to have open and closed campuses. Community input sessions start January 17th at Glenwood Springs High School, January 18th at Basalt High School, and January 23rd at Roaring Fork High School. At 6 o'clock, presentations will be 100% in Spanish with English interpretation. 7 o'clock, English presentations with interpretation in Spanish. So really looking forward to working with our community and community partners in those meetings. We want to just really share an appreciation for our Nutritional Services Director, Octavio Maese, and his team, as well as Chief Operating Officer, Ben Baumfalk. They've really been strategic and collaborative to identify ways that our school facilities and operational teams can support the multi-agency collaborative response to support newly immigrated, unhoused workers in Carbondale. And with funding from regional grants, our nutritional services team is providing dinners at Crystal River Elementary School 5 nights a week for that group of workers. On Monday, our staff was back. Our kids came back yesterday, but our staff was back Monday. K-12 schools or teachers were working at schools to review and analyze mid-year student achievement growth data and make plans for second semester. Our early childhood team met together. We only have a few of these PD days per year. The day for professional development for early childhood was facilitated by researchers and faculty from the University of Denver's Positive Early Learning Experiences Center, the Pele Center. And the work was really around continuing to implement the early childhood strategic plan and strengthening and supporting high quality inclusive environments. And that work continues to just grow and get stronger. In fact, our Roaring Fork School District early childhood leaders will be presenting with the DU Pele Center at an upcoming Colorado Department of Education Early Childhood Special special education regional meeting on their work in the Roaring Fork schools. We're looking forward to starting in February. We've got 17 seniors from across the district who will start participating in a work-based learning program at Valley View Hospital. They'll be pursuing medical assistance apprenticeships. These are paid internships, partnering with Valley View Hospital as part of our broader efforts around career and technical education. We're partnering with CareerWise Colorado River BOCES, a lot of partners coming together on this work, but we're excited to have kids in the hospital starting to work and head towards some of these work-based experiences. We're also looking forward to partnering with Bighorn Toyota, Phil Long Subaru and Honda, Mountain Chevrolet, and then the Roaring Fork School District maintenance and tech teams to really move some of these projects as soon as possible. Finally, this is School Board Recognition Month, so we just want to take a minute to appreciate all of you as volunteers for our district and the important work you do guiding our organizational governance, and jumping right back into it for 2024. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cole. The next business in order is our superintendent report, which will be a presentation from Dr. Cole and Chief Parks.
All right. So although we're talking a lot about our 5-year strategic planning process, we do have strategic priorities for the 23-24 school year. And so the purpose of today's update is to really give kind of check in with everyone on where we are on these strategic priorities for this year as we're halfway through the school year. So we'll talk a little bit about each one. Chief Park will take us through number 1, and then I'll jump in through 2 and 3.
Kind of feel like Dr. Cole's celebrations took a lot of the things that I was going to say about our first one, but Happy New Year. I'm excited to see you back. I'm talking a little bit about our first initiative, which is within the bucket of increasing equity in student achievement. So the school culture piece, Dr. Cole alluded to a reduction in year-over-year numbers of suspensions. I did also want to share that part of that I think is due to a number of things. One is a renewed clarity, work with our deans and clarifying more of the proactive pieces there, and really being intentional about how we're leveraging our district-wide discipline matrix to make sure we're consistent in the types of restorative conversations or and the other consequences for particular incidents. Our culture handbook drafting and reviews in progress. Joel Hathaway, our executive director of schools, is leading that work with our deans as well. And Dr. Cole also shared just the year-over-year improvement on attendance. I do want to double down on the fact that we also appreciate the families who are working hard to make it happen, because we know it is a lot of intentional attention and work there too. In terms of our high quality instruction through implementation of our UIP and all of the action planning work that came out of there. As you know, in October, our UIPs are submitted. It's all in implementation right now across our schools in the district. The MTSS handbook was one of the things that came out of that. It's drafted, first draft, and getting review and input now. And then our mid-year assessments were big through December. And so that's been completed, and our leaders did prepare and meet with teams on Monday, most of them on Monday, about it to have a data dive with the results from those mid-year assessments, as well as other metrics such as semester grades and diving into what the next steps would look like for our second semester. And then our CTE pathway certifications are in progress. It's still continued work, led a lot in part by Mitch Voss, one of our instructional facilitators who's focusing on that work as well as a regional work-based learning system. We're learning a lot along the way in doing this, but his continued work and focus is really helping us along with our high school teams, including Bridges, to make it happen.
Updates from retention and recruitment. The Educational Opportunity Fund has opened, so staff are working on applications for that. That is a kind of a scholarship fund to help staff advance careers or advance credentials or career pathways that would align to roles within the district. So that work has started. Look forward to kind of giving more updates on that as that we kind of award that first round of funding. We continue to look at kind of creative partnerships for different providers to really fill some of the gaps that we're seeing in the hard to fill positions in our classrooms, especially in special education. trying to support some, teachers who are new to us and trying to work with virtual providers in the SPED world, which is not ideal. But we're in a tough spot there. So definitely exploring some of these creative approaches to staffing. Meadowood is absolutely under construction. It's exciting. The work is on time and in some respects catching up. Things are looking really great over there. So if you haven't been that way, you should definitely drive by. Things are moving quick. The housing committee is starting to develop, is really kind of refining some pathways to homeownership for staff and updating some guidelines that will come before the board in the upcoming weeks. I think we have a work session planned with some of those updates as we move forward and anticipate Meadowood opening, which will be an addition of 50 units. And then finally, actually a lot of this work is going to kind of form the bulk of part 2 of this superintendent update on the strategic planning process, but just wanted to remind folks that the portrait of a graduate and core values, we paused on that, really feeling like the work that was started last spring and we had thought had finished by August. We really heard from our community that we didn't spend enough time on that. We needed more time and intentionality around that. So we're going to re-engage with that work in 24-25. So that has paused and it won't pick back up this year. The school resource framework group is still working. There's a lot of projects that team is trying to find better tools and resources to kind of articulate and share and communicate how we allocate funding to schools in ways that stakeholders can better understand and that we can use to better, assess where our investments are going. So stay tuned for work on that. And then strategic plan and kind of what phase we're in. I'm going to go into a little bit of a deep dive on the strategic plan development. So we'll jump over to a little bit more of a holistic update on the strategic planning process. So a lot of these slides you've seen before, but wanted to put them together at this kind of mid-year moment to frame why we're doing the strategic planning. And again, this is really about coming together. It's about alignment. It's about focus. It's about really setting our work out for the next 5 years. We really wanted to have a robust community engagement process. We refined and revised the process that Attuned Education Partners gave us to add additional layers of community input. Those conversations have been really meaningful and insightful and really helpful to, I think, coming up with a better plan. You can see here kind of our cadence of 5-year plan development and where we are this year. And I think the biggest difference with this year's plan is our partnership with Attuned. And you all have gotten to know some of those facilitators in our work sessions with them. And the work, when you think about developing a strategic plan, what's highlighted here and circled is really the work that Attune's taking us through. So, they're the portrait of a graduate or the goals, kind of budget, staffing are things that happen outside the strategic plan, but you can see the components that Attune's working with us on. This slide kind of articulates the different phases that we've been into. We are now kind of at the end of phase 3 in terms of the strategic planning process. We've been working with the organizational diagnostic. We brought that back to our community to see if that was right. We've been working on a first draft of priorities and initiatives. This is, and I think what's really unique and again about the process that Attuned facilitates for us is that they did this organizational diagnostic and pulled data, multiple sources of data to really analyze our strengths and gaps. Those strengths and gaps were really what we dug into in round 2 of the community input sessions with stakeholders. Are these the right things that we're doing well and want to continue and sustain? We also looked at gaps that were identified through the process and wanted to make sure that these resonated with our community, with our teachers, with our staff, with our leaders, with our students, because those strengths and gaps really led to the identification of these priorities. We've heard a lot about these priorities and whether they seem to be on track or not. And in round 2 of our community input sessions, we had 20 total meetings, which is an improvement over round 1. We had community-based meetings for families and staff, 1 in each community, 1 online. We met with students at all of our high schools. We met with community partners, with certified and classified staff. And then we met with a lot of our advisory committees who are, parents and students and staff who are very accustomed to looking at a district level and working on issues with us at that kind of 30,000-foot view. You can see a little bit of the demographics of folks who participated in these conversations, low numbers, but really valuable, meaningful participation and great feedback. And what we were looking for in this round of community meetings was really to looking carefully at the strengths and gaps to see if those were right, and then looking at priorities and initiatives. And at a very high level, what we've kind of been hearing, and frankly, what our strategic planning steering committee is diving into tomorrow is kind of a summary that we heard that for the most part, the strengths and gaps resonate and the priorities seem on point. We heard that we need to elevate the needs of emerging bilingual students. We need to also prioritize the needs of our Latinx students who are lagging in academic growth and achievement areas, that we wanted to really lift that up in our priorities. We've heard that. We also heard from our community that we wanted to prioritize inclusive and representative classrooms, clubs, leadership activities, and really hearing from students that when they think about school culture, they really want to see inclusive and representative spaces in their schools. And so they want us to articulate that more in the strategic plan. And we've also heard, especially from parents, that when it comes to parent partnerships, they want to see more of an emphasis on partnerships that are focused on one-to-one relationships, really supporting that parent-teacher communication, which we all know means we also need to support teachers to have the time and bandwidth to invest in that. And the most important kinds of partnerships we can have as a district are those one-to-one relationships that are really centered on student academic and achievement goals and student well-being with the people who work with them every day. So folks really wanted to see us focus on that. So what's happening right now in phase 3 is that Attuned is working with us to analyze the data and then revise the priorities and initiatives. And then where we're going to go next, and this felt really important to have in front of you again, that because you've seen the priorities and initiatives, but to actually see what the final deliverables will be. Where we're going to head, and this is just an illustrative example, is a plan that you can see is sequenced over the next 5 years, where we actually have action items and tasks under each of those priorities that then is kind of scoped and sequenced over the next 5 years of our implementation of the plan. Additionally, our work will name deliverables. It'll name who's responsible for those deliverables, start dates, due dates. And so I think what we're seeing here, and what I know that our team's really looking forward to, and I know that in talking with board members, you are as well, is that this plan is going to have a lot tighter, more targeted accountability measures and metrics for us all to keep ourselves accountable to the plan. So we'll also be developing those tools. And then finally, really lists of measures and database targets to measure our impact. And so really looking forward to that work. We're not there yet. That's where we're going. That's why you're not going to, we still have a lot of work to do to get these kind of last 3 components in front of you. But the timeline is that we're hoping by February, March to be ready for a board work session to really look at some of those components and review that draft plan. And then really hoping to target a community launch of the plan this spring and into the summer. Okay.
Thank you. So we'll now move into 2 minutes for each board member to ask questions or provide comments or feedback. And we'll start with Director DeFreitas.
Thank you, Dr. Cole. That was very, very helpful to get that long-term look at the strategic plan. And thank you for all your effort in hosting those events. I know that you and your staff put a ton of time into showing up in person in the evening all over the district. And I just really want to recognize that, especially your chief staff as well, who, they were all there supporting, and that was a lot of investment. That shows a lot of values that we've put into this process. And I hope the community can recognize what that investment signifies as to how important this is for the district moving forward. I think my one question, I'm on the page on the slide talking about defining measures and setting data-based targets. And I know that that is outwards into the future, but putting that up against the timeline, phase 3, phase 4, Attuned will then work to steer code to map multi-year initiatives. I'm wondering when, in your mind, in a perfect world, sure, would measurable data be returned to you in such a way that actions could be changed or values could adjust based on whether these implementations are working. Because I know that if that's not happening to the last year and then we're already looking at another strategic plan, sometimes all of that, those measurements were a lot of effort to build. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to put down accurate metrics for such a quantitative value. So I'm wondering, how do you see that timeline working?
I'm going to take a shot and I'd say Chief Park jump in. I think it depends on the metric. I think, one of the things that I know Attune's going to work with us on is bite-sized metrics that feel like we are in real time checking, adjusting, and have the room to pivot if we need to. I mean, we've been celebrating attendance data that we've been looking at month over month. Chief Park, our executive director of schools, Joel Hathaway, have been looking with school leaders on a monthly basis, looking at that school attendance data and tracking it. And so I think that, it's a great question. And what I'm looking for, and I think Attune's going to help us with, is really trying to make sure that the scope of the 5 years has broken down some of these metrics into like smaller pieces so that we can pivot. And if we feel like, wow, we're just not getting the traction we thought we would get, we can reassess. Because it isn't, it isn't going to be a static plan.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you want to add?
No, I think that's right. I think there's if you look at that, you see the big goal, and that's a target of 2026 for a plan that has the first year in 2019. And so this could not be our only monitoring document.
Mhm.
And I would just echo what Dr. Cole was saying, that we would need to adjust. And part of that is making sure that our systems are set up for the ability to gather the kind of metrics that we want to, or that we have common agreements, and whether it's like a part of survey or an assessment or things like that, so that we can monitor that.
Thanks.
Did that answer your question?
It did. No, I'm just imagining how much work that'll be for you. I'm sorry.
It is a lot of work. I'm just saying, and I actually think that that's an important question, because what we don't want to do is set a 5-year goal,
Right.
not think about it for 5 years, say, well, didn't do anything. And so, but we don't do that. We actually monitor throughout the year, and we look at annual, data that's embedded in our UIP for schools, for example, and then we have our district-wide goals.
Thank you.
Dr. Tytler.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question and a comment mostly. First, the question is, can you explain a little bit more under the retention and recruitment slide at the beginning? Can you say what the school resource framework is about? And can you give a little bit more information about that? Because I'm not sure I understand what that is.
Sure. What I think what we're realizing as a leadership team is that we need to more clearly communicate. We're talking about the resource allocation, am I right?
I'm
Sorry.
talking about that slide, the one
This
you were
one?
on, that one. Nope, the next one. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, number 2.
Okay, perfect. What it was feeling like we had heard after the, I think some of the implementations around some of our learning acceleration plan last year, that folks needed to better understand what we're headed towards in terms of staffing, what's our model. We've been talking about trying to name our core model. What are the key components that every school, we're trying to staff every school for, in terms of administration, student supports, core curriculum, interventional supports, where are we headed, and what schools have that proper staffing, what don't, where are we trying to get to? If we have excess money, where should be our priorities? And so I think the real task of this team has been trying to kind of better articulate some of those, come up with tools that better tell that story to our stakeholders. And then there's a bunch of other pieces that team's been trying to work on. And I think that the themes are really around how we allocate resources and how we communicate that transparently and clearly so that we can make really strategic decisions. And some of the things that team has also been tangling with is kind of our reality post-ESSER, where we're going to lose funding for school-based health aides and nurses and the building guest teachers, and trying to figure out okay, well, where are our gaps and what we're trying to staff? Where are our priorities? Where do we really feel that we want to provide direction for schools, but allow them to have the autonomy to make decisions within a range of strategies that we can centrally support. And so trying to come up with tools to better have those conversations. We're also trying to grapple with things of managing for enrollment and managing for enrollment moves up and down, and how do we appropriately stay adaptable, reasonable, knowing how hard it is to hire and recruit and retain teachers. And so there's that team's got a lot of problems that they're tangling with. But I think the biggest theme around there really has to do with the resource allocation and clear communication and transparency about how we're doing that.
Great. And so who is part of that working group that says the working group convened?
That is Chief Park, Executive Director of Schools, Joel Hathaway, our Chief Financial Officer, Nathan Markham, Glenwood Springs High School Assistant Principal, Lindsay Henschel, Crystal River Elementary School, Principal Amy Brockman, Riverview School Principal Adam Bullock is joining, Heather Fox.
Yeah.
Adam's joining to jump in to cover for elementary. Yep. Is that right? Did I get, that's the crew. That's the
Great, thank you. And then just my comment more is on the sample feedback from the community meetings. I really like the bulleted feedback. It seems like great things for us to be focusing on. I appreciate that list, so thank you.
We really appreciate the feedback. Those have been, we're just so grateful for the folks that showed up and really dug into some big weighty material and content with us. It's been really valuable conversation. And Dave, sorry, we're realizing that the school resource allocation team also includes Dave Lindenberg.
Great, thank you.
Director After.
Thanks for that great thorough presentation. On the slide on retention and recruiting, which I think, I don't know if you're going back, but it was a while ago. When I was reading the presentation in advance, I definitely had a little bit of a red flag go up around virtual providers. Can you just talk a little bit more about what's going on there, and just to make sure that I understand what VocaVision is and what the service they are or might be providing?
Sure. I want to take this if you want.
VocaVision is one of the virtual providers we are exploring this year to try to fill in gaps in our special education services. And so after a lot of effort in trying to recruit in-person people, we're really struggling last year. And so this is a thing that we're trying this year. We're continuing to evaluate whether this is something we want to continue to do. We've been hearing, having some good discussions with parents and school leaders and teachers, and what is helpful about it and what is really challenging about it. And there are things that we're learning this year to inform whether or not we would continue or try to come up with something else creative to address the persistent challenge we have with special education staffing.
Yeah, I mean, that team is special service providers who are, often around mental health, skill building for students, where we were unable to staff those positions with Rutherford School District staff, and have an obligation to make sure that students have access to those services.
So are the students in school buildings and having the virtual provider come to them? Okay.
They're in school buildings that they do need to be set up with, oftentimes it means a staff member or pair or somebody needs to get the student, get them set up, have the laptop there with the service provider and make sure they have the materials and things like that. And so in the spaces where we don't necessarily have a cadre of additional paras to go with each provider, those are the kinds of things logistically that we're trying to grapple with this year, and then determine whether we would continue with it.
Great. Thanks. On the slide on school culture, which I think is the previous one, can you just remind me I know there's this position in some schools, Dean of Culture, and I still don't know what that is. And I think the job title isn't clear. So I think that's part of what you're getting at with this bullet point. And it seems important. And so I just want to make sure I understand what that person does.
Sure. So there's a lot of the proactive work that is involved in codifying, what are the rituals, traditions that we have at the school. There's also the important part of codifying the systems that are in place to respond to behavior incidents in close collaboration with the principal and assistant principal. And so the part of that was intended to allow additional time for principal and assistant principal to be in classrooms, to be coaching versus always being in responding to behavior incidents. It doesn't mean that 0% of a principal's time is spent addressing a behavior incident. It does mean that it helps in significantly reducing it. Additionally, our schools have been doing really great things in terms of rituals and traditions too. There are additional things that are also happening, in part planned and executed and supported and led by a dean of culture as well. And so it varies in terms of what the role looks in, like an elementary dean of culture and a high school dean of culture, where they may be more, student leadership groups that a high school dean of culture is also leading, in addition to the proactive and responsive culture and behavior responses.
Great. And just a follow-up question, is the dean of culture, since not every school has a dean of culture, is that determined by that school resource framework that you were talking about earlier?
It's not, because the school resource framework is something we newly started working on this year.
Oh,
This
okay.
was coming out of last year when we started initially planning the district UIP and how we might accelerate learning across our schools. Some of the schools did choose to fund their own dean of culture, or has had one already on staff for a number of years. Many schools didn't. And so some of the schools this year decided to fund it. We did also fund for some of the schools, and our hope is that we can fund it in the future for all of our schools.
So it's a school by school decision to some extent, if they have the resources.
It's a school by school decision if they didn't already have one that was decided to be allocated in the district.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Thanks.
That's all. Director Ramirez.
I just wanted to ask a question. Oh, thanks team for your work on this. I just want to ask a question on our CT programs. How do kids apply to these programs? How does that work right now?
Right now, there's a couple things. If students have expressed interest in fill in their it's blanking on me, the ICAP survey is one of the ways we can gauge interest. There's conversation with counselors and sharing what they're interested in. And then part of the courses where they may come and request. What we're trying to do through having a more defined pathway and progress is that it's just more clearer to students and families and school staff what the pathways are and the course sequence that they could take.
And do all of our high schools currently participate? We have students participating in CTE programs and like, okay, I just want to make sure that all.
Yeah, and then we're all, yes. And that might also include the concurrent enrollment options that they have as well through CMC.
By our next work session, will we have the revised priorities from the year?
That's a good question. Maybe. We're working on it tomorrow. So I would think, I don't know how far we'll get. We have the Steerco has about an hour, maybe two with Attune tomorrow. And I know that that's on, I don't know that we'll get quite to a complete version of them. But I'm not sure. We can find out. I can certainly include in the update if we're there.
Yeah, it says on here that February, March is when we're gonna have our work session with them. So if possible, I think it would be appropriate that we schedule that work session when we are able to see the revised draft. It'd be good. Because at this point, we just need to.
Sorry, say that again.
Because if at that work session, if there wasn't anything new.
Oh, for sure. Right. Yeah, I'm hoping, and we need to see about how our progress goes, that by that next work session, you have a lot more of what you saw is coming in terms of refined priorities, initiatives, deliverables, measures, outcomes, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, great.
Thank you both for all of your work on this. A lot of my questions have already been touched on. The one thing that stood out to me in this presentation, and I appreciate the breakdown of who responded and participated in the focus groups, which was something that we had asked for last time. So that was helpful to see. But I was surprised to see that students outnumbered adults oftentimes, it seemed like. And I'm wondering if there's anything in particular that you identified through this process that seemed particularly effective for engaging students. Because obviously their voices are incredibly important within the district. And I love that we're hearing them so loudly and clearly through this process.
You know, I think that, of course, there's no silver bullet on outreach, but I think if we are close to any sort of bullet, like silver bullet, it's about relationships. And for our students, we went to our schools. We brought food, and if the students were so bold as to tell us what they wanted, that's what we brought. And I also think that we leaned for students' initial recruitment on the relationships that kids have with their school leaders to really suggest and recommend a representative group of students to participate. And we really saw that in the students who showed up to these meetings. And then I think by the second time around, even our own team's relationships with students, I remember walking through a hallway and ready to run a meeting, and it was grabbing kids that I knew and saying, wrong direction, come with us. So I do think the relationships make a big difference. And certainly we find that with families in participation. I think when we look at the really strong attendance and participation at our family advisory councils, equity advisory council, district wellness committee, it has to do because of one-on-one outreach and relationship. And so I do think that that's why we saw that strength in the student engagement. And I also think that there's also a component of making sure that when folks show up to meetings, kids, parents, staff, that it's of high value, high impact, and that we're listening. And so the meetings, with the help of Attuned, were tight. They were on point. We were looking at materials. We have hard copies. So I think that helped too. And we also, especially with students, I think gave them a big picture of the priorities and then nudged them in directions to say, like, let's start with the students first. This one's about you. And so we also kind of let the participants really lean in on the areas that they wanted to lean on. And so I think that also was making them more lessons.
And in conversation with Attuned, we feel like we've gotten a solid representative sample of voices.
You know, we asked that a couple times and we continue to, and their take, I think, comes really from more of a research lens where they were starting to feel as they were going through our data saying, we're starting to see a lot of duplication, which to them indicates saturation of information and data. And so their take was that we had done, well, we certainly did more than what they laid out initially, but that we had achieved, I think, for their assessment, and we can press them when they meet with us at the board again, was that we were really hitting where the feedback started to be duplicated, which for them felt like we've gotten the info.
Great. I don't have any further questions. I'm excited to get into the next round of it and see the new and improved priorities as they continue to be revised. So thank you.
We do follow up.
Oh, sorry. Oh, we still have 5 minutes of open discussion. It's my fault. Thanks, Penny.
And I do have one follow-up question, just going on what Director Ramirez had asked about being presented and making sure that when we do have our next strategic planning process with Attune, that we have that information. And will that information be given out prior to us? Because I just remember last time when we were in that meeting, it was sort of like, here it is. And then we were supposed to like look through it and sort of digest it and then come up with good questions for you. So if we could get that prior to meeting and discussing it, that would be really helpful.
That's helpful feedback, and I want to make sure that they know that.
Okay, thank you.
Also add number of participants also congregated, like that we've had a live higher.
For the whole thing, we can do that.
And I had a follow-up on Director Apter's question regarding virtual providers. I understand it's still in pretty early phases, I mean, halfway, but have you gotten staff feedback about those positions and those services being filled? I know it's very difficult when it's something so new and in a challenging situation that I appreciate has been every way you've come at it to solve with by hiring. I'm just wondering though, what is the special education or professionals, what are they saying about this new take?
It's not ideal. It's really hard. It's a heavy lift on the school-based staff to facilitate those meetings and services for kids. I mean, the providers that I think what we're hearing, the providers we're working with are amazing, talented, experienced folks that are on screen.
Yeah.
And that's not the world we want to return to.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's also one of the things where we can't just say, well, I guess we couldn't fill that with an in-person person. We're just not going to do it. Like,
Right.
we can't. And so this is a challenge that we are really deeply aware of, and they need really, especially with special education staffing and getting providers that we need,
No, it's okay.
so.
I think it's addressing this gap, I think, is one of our priorities in so many areas in terms of, hard to fill positions. This is the top of our list right now. Really feels like we're doing, we're trying everything possible at this point and nudging into areas of, that we've never done before and certainly for providers, but it's not ideal and it's not,
Yeah, it's also one of those things like in the state of Colorado for special education, there's no alternative licensure pathway. There's no, where there exists for teachers or principals. So you really can't take, I'm not saying alternative licensure is a shortcut, it's just a different path, but it is not allowed.
Right. So
with good reason, it's a very specialized thing. So it's one of those things where it is a big challenge. And so we're excited to continue to thought partner on other solutions that we have that are thinking creatively, thinking of how we grow our own, thinking of how we partner with local licensing programs to support, like, what could that look like?
yeah, and I think it just underscores the importance of addressing teacher retention at every level possible, because that's like, you have state compliance issues, you can't not provide services. And yet, as we've tried to fill these in every way possible. So I just wanted to say that out loud on the record as we look forward to determining where resources go in the future. It's just, we need to keep teachers in the classroom. We need to bring more professionals to our valley. Yeah.
Do you happen to know how many open positions we have in special ed?
Right now.
Yeah. Or
I
typically.
don't have it off the top. But I can.
Just curious. You don't need to do extra work to find the number for me.
Any other questions, comments, discussion? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm gonna jump in. At this time, we would have welcomed members of the public who had signed up to address the board, but there are no speakers signed up tonight. Members of the public who wish to share their views with the board may also always do so in writing at any time. For this evening's public comment, we received no written comments. The next business in order is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes routine personnel, minutes from our previous board meetings, and policies ECAG and JRCB on final read. Directors, are there any items that you would like to pull off of the consent agenda for a separate discussion and vote? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second? Please call the vote.
Director After,
Aye.
Director Ramirez, Director Kuhlenberg.
Aye.
Director DeFreitas,
Aye.
Director Teitler.
And these microphones are working very well tonight.
Yeah.
We just had him serviced by a local provider and he did a great job.
Directors, you've just approved the consent agenda. The next business in order is discussion on policies ADB, BG, JRA/JRC, JRA/JRCE1, and JRA/JRC-R. We are not voting on these. These are all on either first read or on second read and policies that require 3. So we will jump straight into discussion. We'll start with 2 minutes for each board member for discussion. If we need to extend it to 4, because we have so many policies on deck tonight, I'm open to extending it to 4. And we'll start with Director Teitler.
Thank you. I had a few questions. I'll start with ADB, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism policy. Both at the beginning of in the second paragraph, I believe, and then towards the end, several times it talks about budgetary limitations needing to meet the needs of the students and that there might be differentiating of resource allocation. And it says that a couple different times in that. Do we have a thought in mind of how that process is going to play out? Who is going to be involved in that process? Who's making those decisions? How that's going to be decided upon, and any kind of time frame where that would be done?
You direct.
Yeah, I need to
Where you-
open it up.
where
I'm
you-
sorry.
The third paragraph down on the first page, the first sentence, it says this means, I'll highlight it.
Yeah. I,
Gotcha. You know, in a lot of ways, we do some budgeting for schools based on student needs. So we have different allocations that are kind of based on gen ed, general education enrollments. And then we have different allocations of resources and staffing around emerging bilingual students, around students who have read plans and making sure that we have
Mhm.
everything. So in some respects, we already do this a little bit. I would say that some of the areas where we're starting to lean and push or wonder about, get curious about, is different student groups who might have different needs that we haven't considered quite as a specialized population. So for example, our newly immigrated students, especially students who are new to an American school system and are predominantly Spanish language speakers. So especially our newly immigrated students coming in at middle school or high school. And if students come in with a significantly interrupted formal education and might need, maybe adult literacy classes at a high school, currently we're not staffed for that. We have amazing language arts teachers and literacy teachers, but at the high school level, we don't have adult beginning literacy. And so some of the things we're starting to look at is like, if we were to have the resources, could we allocate funding to schools specialized around the needs of newly immigrated students and newly immigrated students with significantly interrupted formal education? And so I think that some of this is already happening. I think some of it will need to continue to happen. We're hopeful. I think that some of the tools we're trying to create that really maybe better articulate or explain how we allocate resources on what ratios to schools and for what purpose are the kinds of tools that will help guide these discussions. Like, I don't think we can do this work until we can see what we're doing and how we're doing it. And we've always had these in our board members who have been through a budget cycle before have seen our school-based budgeting that is often based around student need. And I think what we're trying to name is a little bit more of a less individual school-based, but more district-wide that really looks at school allocations. And so in terms of specific components, I would say the other piece that we know we're moving and the board's involved in this is we're trying to, create, we don't have a budget committee that's part of the board that meets with a regular cadence to look at these kinds of investments and manage those. So we're trying to also build, I think, some accountability systems as a shared board and executive team that could hold some of this. I mean, right now, other than the budget meetings you have with Chief Markham starting about this time of year into the time of approving the budget, we don't have a routine cadence of looking at budgets and making sure these things are held accountable. So I do believe that, to answer your question, some of the kind of technical logistic components have to do with having deliberate intentional committees that are doing this work, looking at this work, that have accountability representation from the board of directors, that have operational leadership with chief financial officer. So I think some of those are going to be the pieces that would be able to hold this work.
okay, and I just question, the reason why that comes up is just sitting through IBB recently, and this type of question comes up in IBB, and then it becomes a big thing through that, and it just seems like it's something that we're going to have to give some definite forethought to as we make this policy. Thank you. My second question is on BG, and that is on the second page. It's the first paragraph at the top that is in black. And it says, during discussion of a policy proposal, the board shall seek out the views of the community and staff. The board shall take action only after hearing recommendations of the superintendent and viewpoints of persons and groups affected by the policy. It seems like if we're making this policy to do this, like we don't always hear from the superintendent when we're making policy, and we certainly aren't going out and eliciting and saying, this is a new policy we're going to be discussing. Can we get input from the staff on this policy per se?
You know, I would say that our revised policy process that this board helped create does, I mean, what happens is when a policy is identified for review, either through, you know, kind of knowing that we are out of compliance legally and need to prioritize something, or because staff brings something or the board brings something, the policy review committee really does, and the executive team goes through all, Chief Landon kind of facilitates this. We go through the policies and say, on the executive team, whose departments are going to be impacted? What kind of review needs to happen? If it goes to Chief Park, it needs to go to the instructional team or it needs to go to school leaders. She's then responsible for doing that work and bringing it back to policy committee. So I think that in a lot of ways that does happen. And I do think that the way this board has created policy committee and is implementing that with the regular cadence with, you know, and Chief Landon's really kind of backs all these pieces up so that exec team has time to look at something, make sure we're getting it out to appropriate stakeholders before it comes to policy committee. So I do think that could we do more? Maybe, but I actually feel pretty good about this one, that right now we have the right pieces in place. I think we're always learning, and certainly sometimes we hear from different stakeholders of like, we should have looked at that policy before it came out. But I do think we actually have some of the steps now to make sure those things happen.
I do for sure see that with a meeting ahead of time through policy with the committee, that as the superintendent has that piece there that we're talking about. It just seems like going out and eliciting the feedback of.
Can I chime in on that, Director Tyler?
please.
So the policies are released for review when you're all seeing them with the agenda. When it goes out to the community, people can submit written or come in and have comments at the meeting on the policies. I think that is the intended vehicle for the community input.
And I understand. I thank you. That does clarify. I think it's just more of the vocabulary saying the board shall seek out the views of the community and staff. Like, I don't do that. And maybe the people who are on policy committee are doing that, but it seems pretty lofty to say we're going out and seeking out that with all the policies that we're doing.
I totally understand. I mean, that's a great distinction on the language, because I would say right now that feels, at least to me as your interim superintendent, like that's on in a lot of ways to get that community input. For example, you know, there's a family partnership policy that you heard the DAC present on. It's on the agenda for the Family Advisory Council next week. So, you know, and that's not a direction from the board. That's our internal team saying, okay, DAC took a look at it. Now we need Family Advisory Council to take a look at it. We're going to need teachers, you know. So I mean, we could revise that if we wanted to shift it to the district shall seek out.
I think that would be better for me, at least that clarification. And then the last one I have is on JRA JRC/R. Just at the bottom of page 1, there's just some numbering issues with the policy. There's like a 2 and a 2 and a 3 and a 3, just a wordsmithing.
Thank you. Director After.
Thanks. On that piece, Director Tyler was just talking about, I agree. I had flagged that to bring up as well, because I had the exact same reaction when I read it, which was that I am supposed to be seeking out feedback. And it sounds like that's what a combination of the policy committee and the staff are doing. So I think clarifying that language would be more accurate. I also wondered on BG, it doesn't mention the policy committee at all. I wondered if that was intentional or if it should be. I was looking for it in the document.
That is a great question.
Okay. I did have some feedback on ADB, which was actually sort of related to what we were just talking about. And I think makes the point effectively. So my question is, how do staff feel about implementing ADB? I'm in full agreement with the philosophy behind ADB. It's a long policy and it's quite lofty, and so I'm just wondering how implementable the staff feels that it is, because as I read it, and I honestly read it several times to try to understand what the real meat of the policy was, what we are implementing with this policy. And I felt like if I were a staff person, I would not be clear on that. And so I wanted to, which not trying to put words in y'all's mouth, but I did want to check in and see what the staff, how the staff will be implementing it. And in particular, is this policy directed at the advisory council, or is it more for the general district office staff and the superintendent and leadership? I just felt like there was a lot of lack of clarity for me as I was reading it.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, the staff so executive team has looked at this number of times, making sure that capacity piece falls within what our departments can manage. Our equity advisory council and the equity steering committee, who are named and responsible for different components, have also looked at this a number of times. You know, I think that you're right. It's different than a lot of policies in that it names, there's a lot of definitions, there's a lot of kind of aspirational language, kind of North Star. This is what we're headed towards. This is what we're working towards. You know, when I think there are some tighter accountability pieces in here that the superintendent needs to hold. There's named an annual report to the Board of Education, you know, using some suggested metrics. I think one of the things the staff definitely, we have looked at an iteration of this that required the kinds of metrics that are in Exhibit A, and that felt really untenable for staff, which is why they became a recommendation of types of metrics that could be used instead of a mandate. So there were some pieces that staff really felt like, wow, we couldn't do that right now. I do think that there's a push in here on the superintendent to, you know, really implement the policy, to have metrics, to have accountability, to have goals. It's requiring an annual report. It's requiring a once every 5-year equity audit by an external party. Those don't seem unreasonable to me.
Great.
But it's big. It's big work.
Okay. I don't have any other questions.
Director Ramirez.
Thank you. I guess I just want to start off by saying that I think there's a lot of conversation tonight around big tasks and a lot of work. And one of the sentiments that I feel like I have strived to share is when we as a district drive our feet on these really important items, it's always at the expense of our most marginalized students in our district. I don't think that we center students enough to really understand that it's 2024 now, and that this is like taken already too long. I am a graduate of this school district, have siblings who are graduates of this school district, have extended family, friends, and there is a very real frustration on this feeling like a lot of work when it's like 2024 and some of these things should have been fixed decades ago. So I just really want to start there because I think it's really important to state, like, we are putting our district in a position to really elevate students and to center students, and I think that is so urgent and so necessary for this time. I just wanted to share too, on BG, and you know, I know that we're gonna have more conversation on all of these policies, because most of them are in first reading, but you know, we didn't have something like this before that really clarified what we as board members do, and how we create policy. And I think it's really important for this entire board. Yes, we have a policy committee. But a lot of these policies, and these policies really are meant to be district-wide. And so these policies, I would encourage my colleagues on the board to actually seek input from the community, teachers, staff, stakeholders, because like this is what we as a board are voting on to say is what we as a board and district want to follow for the benefit of students. So I personally, aside from policy committee, do send, you know, our policies out. I feel like it's really important to ask questions, to be talking to the community, to be informed on what teachers are saying, students are feeling, because I think it's necessary. This is the bulk of our work, is making sure that the policies are good policies that center students, that support teachers, that are focused on the future of our district, and hopefully, you know, the sustainability of our district and moving in the right path for students and the district and the community. So I just really wanted to stress that. I don't have any questions. Thank you so much.
Director DeFreitas.
Thank you. Touching on BG, just to back up what Director Ramirez was talking about, and the questions brought up about the wording, going back to that real quick about, is it the board or the staff or the district seeking out? And does publishing the policies ahead of time in the packet, and if the interested public knows where to find them, they're there, does that qualify the verb seek? I'm not quite sure. It's just something we could maybe examine. I think you've already flagged that for some wordsmithing. And I think just carrying through the intent behind it, as Director Ramirez was saying, I would like to hold the word seek, but I think we should just reflect on what that looks like, maybe a little bit more in the framing of community engagement with policies. Going ahead back to ADB as well, understanding that the scope of what we are needing to do as a district is enormous when it comes to equity. I think there may be opportunity with this policy to make it more of a digestible directive, both to staff, but also to welcome the community into understanding why it's so important. And some of that may be accomplished by a few organizational tweaks. It is an unusual policy. I mean, reading it first through, it strikes me as more like a white paper, which there's a lot of value to that, but I think we're going to lose a bit of our audience, perhaps, both with staff that hasn't been involved in these critical discussions when they're being asked to implement it, and also the community members who want to understand why we need to be shifting these resources in the way that we do. So I feel like perhaps a structural revision would be useful in the context of grouping deliverables more upfront, pushing more of the philosophy a little bit lower, making sure that what we are including there is not creating is creating I know it's a challenge. It is a challenge. We need to rise to it, but it also needs to not be so inaccessible to the day-to-day implementation of staff members that we don't get any of it done. So I guess, I don't know, if you were to walk out of the room and it was finished, is it done? Do you have enough feedback, enough clarity on the next steps? Or I guess I'm just worried that we're going to lose something because of its density, which I'm 100% behind the need and the philosophy and the urgency of that Director Ramirez was identifying. I just don't want the shape of the document to get in the way.
I think that's helpful. I mean, I certainly, when I think of, you know, I often read through these and scan them as like, all right, what do I have to do? Right. And you don't get to that until you're down at the bottom of page 3, where, you know, we're really naming the responsibilities of different teams in the work, where we're naming the accountability components. So I hear you on, you know, could we move this up? And I mean, I wonder, and I know we'll have 5 minutes when you all can kind of converse of the best way to work on that together if we want to look at structural shifts. But I agree with you that when it's like, all right, so what do we get? You know, you're really scanning towards the bottom to get to like, okay, there's the reporting, there's the accountability, there's the audits that, you know, those pieces are at the bottom.
And I think that, Can I keep going?
Yep.
And I think the context is important. Like, I don't think we need to get rid of that. And obviously the equity committee's weighed in so heavily and there's been a lot of feedback already. Seeking feedback has happened there. But also I want people who've never opened it before or doesn't even know it exists when it's out publicly to be able to look at this and understand exactly why it's so important and to know what it's going to look like in their schools. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Yep.
I made a few comments in the policies. I think that, you know, I have a lot of thoughts about ADB. I think starting off, I think I would challenge every board member to go back and look at Section A. It's our foundations and our overarching ideals of our district. That's what Section A is. This isn't meant to be a heavily implemented policy. This is the lofty, this is where we want to go. You'll see a wellness policy in Section A. That's about the goals of having our students well. You'll see a safe schools policy. It's not about we keep our schools safe by locking our doors and checking everybody and signing people in. That's the how. We as a board are identifying the what. And our Section A foundations and legal documents or legal foundations and foundational policies are about who we want to be, who we are striving as a district to become, and how we want our students to feel and be treated and be welcomed and taught and be a part of our community. And so I think that ADB does that. And I think that it hits it. And I think that we are getting bogged down in the how, and that is not what our policies are about. And I think it's easy. Don't get me wrong. It's very easy to do that. How is it going to be implemented? How are we going to do it? That's not up to us. That's up to staff. As a board, we identify what, and this policy clearly identifies what we want to see in regards to diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. And it gives our board and future boards the power to ensure that it's being done, the power to hold our district accountable, as Director Ramirez was saying, and move the needle on some of these initiatives that we all agree are important, that we all agree that we want to see in place, that we all agree should have been done decades ago. But we've never had a policy in place that would empower a board to hold leadership accountable. And that's what this does. And that's why it is such an important policy to get in the books. So these fears about the how and the breadth of this, I think, need to be balanced with the impact that it could and will have for our students. This work is being done. A lot of this work is being done, but there's not that document that even staff could point out and say, hey, this is important to the Board of Education and they've identified this is important. We need to ensure that we're funding this fully and that we're continuing to prioritize this work, because they haven't been able to say that historically. And that's why this is so important. So those are some of my comments on that. I made a few notes in there, but does it put us out of compliance immediately? Yes, but it empowers the board to push the district to move us into compliance. Without a policy in place, we can't make that push. We don't have the ability to say we want these things done. And I think we all agree that we want these things done, and the district agrees that we want these things done. And yes, Director Ramirez and I have been working on this for years, and this is common in other districts. Many other districts have these policies on the books. Is it new for our district? It is, but it is incredibly important and has the potential to be very impactful for our students. For policy BG, I think that I do not believe we should include anything about policy committee. Policy is, I'm going to say policy a lot in this. Policy is much more difficult to change. And if this board or future boards want to shift the way the policy committee operates, I think that should be more of an operational norm. Again, like not the what, or not the what, but the how we accomplish this via policy committee. We do seek out the views of community and staff through that committee. And personally, I think that we could change that. We can say the board shall either direct staff or, but I agree too that it's the onus is on us to ensure that we're getting that done, and how it's done can change from board to board. So I don't have a problem with the language as is. Did I already hit my 4 minutes? Yeah. All right. We'll now have 5 minutes of open discussion.
I would like to just piggyback on what Director Ramirez was saying about how the Equity Advisory Council has worked and how it should have been done. Yes, decades ago, and it is something that I'm glad to see that we're addressing and making change to. But I would also like to praise the big steps that have been taken, and especially the last year, because having gone to an equity advisory committee meeting, I think less than 2 years ago, certainly less than 2 years ago, so long I've been here, but it was like in its infancy, and it was just like a committee that was very loosely put together, and it was without direction at that point. And to see the steps that have been taken to get us to this point, I think a long time coming, yes. And I applaud what is happening, but I do think there's been great steps taken in the last recent amount of time. And so I wanted to say a job well done in that.
We have policy committee on Friday, so I'm happy to also, think we should put these two at least on that agenda so that we can further discuss. You know, I think for me as a board member, being that this is my 5th year, the frustration is real. You know, I genuinely think that oftentimes we are more concerned with adults and adult perception and adult comfort than doing right by our students. And so for me, honestly, like I will be totally honest and say that I also like this policy has changed a lot. There's still a lot of conversation to come on it, but I don't see anything within this policy as a parent, as a board member, as a Latina, as a graduate, as a sibling of graduates, as an aunt of future graduates, like as a community member, that I feel is hard to accomplish in this policy. And so that is where I, you know, I would love to hear where there is need for clarity on that as a member of the policy committee, but I genuinely don't feel that there is anything that is unattainable for us to accomplish.
I would accept the word. I mean, it's definitely all attainable and it needs to be pursued, but you do have to recognize that this is a huge direction shift and a huge priority shift, and that it will be hard for those who are in the classroom, and just recognizing the effort that our district and our teachers are committing to by adopting it is going to be huge, especially to get their buy-in. Yeah.
And I think that's important to recognize, as well as recognizing that our school district is almost 60% Latino, and that this policy is really important for all of our staff in our district to really solidify that we care deeply about equity.
Mm-hmm.
If I can jump in, I think what's helpful about this policy, to your point, Director DeFreitas, is that it allows us to name where we need to go, and what we need to do, and allows us to have those conversations with staff to say, how do we remove barriers for you? What are the supports you need to get there? What coaching, what staffing, what training, what resources, what tools, what structures, and then to create those conditions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it gives us that ability to say, this is where we want to head. What do you need to get there? Because I think those targeted conversations are so important. And you're right, like we can't do it without that buy-in, without that support, and we can't expect people to do it without the infrastructure. That is, you know, the onus and responsibility certainly of our operation leaders and our district teams. And so I appreciate that lens on the needs to execute. And we're certainly living that reality of like, okay, like how are we gonna get that report put together? We're limited in staffing, like how are we gonna build, you know, systems to make sure these things happen? And yes, we do have a lot of this information. How do we pull it at the right time in the right place? And but I appreciate that it names who we need to be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad to have this conversation because I was thinking of this as like, okay, how are we going to implement this? And it's good to know that that wasn't the intention, or that the goal is to, under the AAU category of the policy documents, to set aspirational targets, or not targets, but aspirations. So thanks for that explanation, because I wasn't tracking that carefully before. I still think there's a little bit of confusion for me as a reader when I look at it toward the end, because if this is the what, not the how, then at the bottom of page 5, it goes into accountability for equity, and it says, for example, the district shall contract with a third-party provider. So that feels very Howie to me. But maybe that's just semantics.
And I think that's related to an equity audit, which is the same like in our finance policies. We have that the district shall contract with a third-party provider to do our finance audits. And so that's not the how of how the district gets there. That's the how of ensuring compliance that we're getting there, which I think are two different things, right? One related to accountability and one related to operations and systems that are being put into place to get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And just to clarify, the next time this policy comes up, it's not consent agenda, right? Because it's a new one.
No, so it would be, because this is the third read. This was on the agenda in December,
Right.
but it can be pulled. And that's totally fine. This is a big policy.
And we need to get it passed. Like, I'm not trying to drag my feet. I'm just trying to clarify since I'm new to this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the second read. We had a read in December. This is the second read. And so third read would be next meeting, but we can pull it off of the consent agenda and we can discuss and vote. We can pull it and we can delay the vote. You know, we have all of those options.
I'm happy to vote whenever I don't need to delay it.
Any other comments on ADB, BG, JRA, JRC, JRA, JRC-R, or JRA, JRC-E-1?
I would just like to add from Dr. Ramirez's comment at the beginning of ADB that is highlighted in yellow. I would agree that I don't understand its placement there of that phrase.
Yeah, that was something we talked about in the last policy committee, and I don't think we resolved it. We moved some language around. We can continue that discussion on Friday.
I did have one comment on JRA. Oh, my son's initials. But I can't actually open it now. Oh, no, it worked. Okay. Yeah, there was a reference in here to, I'm sorry, I can't find it now, but there was a reference to like director of, to a specific staff person that I wasn't sure was actually a staff person.
In ADB?
No, in JRA. Let me see if I can find it.
Which of the three JRAs do you know?
The first one. Sorry, maybe it got removed. I rescind my comment because I can't find what I was talking about.
Was it like custodian of records?
Yes. I didn't know. I just wanted to make sure that that was
There's
a
no
person.
official title of custodian of records, but it's a responsibility.
Okay,
And
so
that
someone
might-
knows who that is. Okay, that's all.
All right. We good? Yeah. Yep. Thank you. The next business in order is action on a revised superintendent hiring timeline. We've made some amendments, specifically incorporating some community feedback, coffee chat sessions next week, and then also moving the finalist selection week to the week of March 4th to accommodate for work scheduling conflicts on our end and actually on HYA's end. So the amendments proposed would be adding community input sessions the week of January 15th, and then switching those 3 dates where they say February 26th, all to March 4th. This is an action item, so do I have a motion to approve an amended timeline?
I make a motion to approve the amended timeline.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Is there just, or we'll start discussion. If there's any discussion, we'll start with director after. If you have any comments or questions.
On the timeline?
Yeah.
No, thanks for, I appreciate very much, you working with my schedule. I know that was an issue. And thanks for putting all the work into, making this all fit.
Director Ramirez?
The board, will be doing some coffee chats, next week, and so I just wanted to make sure that those will be shared during our direct comments. But our team will be sending out surveys and, some of that information via Remind, as well as the family and community newsletter. And so we just ask that the community be involved in this process. It's very important for us, and I hope to see you guys at our community chat.
Director DeFreitas.
Yeah, just echoing Director Ramirez's comments. We've been really looking at ways to continue to engage the community in the superintendent hiring process, recognizing how important their input and buy-in is going to be to bring in a leader into our district who can represent our community, our students and our teachers with the whole support of that community behind them. So I just want to encourage those listening and those reading to reach out to us as we go through this process, to ask for what you need, to share your thoughts with the directors who represent you, and make sure that we're just welcoming the community in. And I look forward to the coffee chats next week, which will get that really started.
Director Tyler.
And just piggybacking on that, though the idea behind those coffee chats are to hear input on what we are looking for in the next superintendent and the process in which we are engaging in steps that we should make sure that we engage in the process.
And to round that out, I would just also encourage our community to stay involved. Be on the lookout for reminds and notes in our community and family newsletters, staff newsletters for staff. There are going to be plenty of opportunities to provide feedback. We're going to be engaging an advisory committee this time around. And we as a board really are interested and open to hearing from our constituents, and we're hopeful that people will reach out. This process is underway and it's going to be moving quickly. So we need involvement and we need people to be engaged and stay engaged. And thank you to all of my fellow board members for being committed to participate in this process and for being all in. It is a heavy lift, and I think that we're all ready to take on this work and really committed to naming our next superintendent. So we'll have 5 minutes of open discussion now. If anybody has any other questions, comments, things they want to bring up. Seeing none, will you please call the vote?
Director Tyler,
Aye.
Director DeFreitas,
Aye.
Director Kuhlenberg.
Aye.
Director Ramirez, Director After.
Aye.
Directors, you've just approved a revised timeline for the superintendent search. The next business in order is board reports and comments. We'll begin with Director Ramirez.
I will be at local next week, Tuesday, the 16th at 10 a.m. If any community members, families, parents, staff, stakeholders want to join me for a cup of coffee and conversation on any of their ideas, comments, concerns, feedback for our superintendent search. I also just wanted to mention that I did receive my official NSBA Academy Federal Relations Network document. Thanks to Director Tytler for taking on becoming our representative at CASB. And so I'm really excited. I'll be heading to Washington to join some of our Colorado board members to have some conversation around what we need from our legislators here in the state. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be representing our school district, our rural school district, and to be able to be part of this network, as our board has continuously aimed at making sure that we are sharing our concerns and our needs at the state level. So that's my work. Thank you.
Thank you. Director DeFreitas.
Thanks. And I will be available for the coffee chat at the Starbucks in Glenwood Springs next Monday, which is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We're going to go with an evening hour, 5 to 6 p.m. at the Starbucks there. Welcome all of your thoughts and comments. We're really interested in finding out how we can all move forward with the superintendent hiring process. So please join me. And I think that's all I have for the moment.
Thank you. Director Tytler.
I am planning on doing my chat at the Carbondale Library Wednesday, the 17th at 10 a.m. Hope people can come out and share their thoughts on what they're looking for in the next superintendent in our district. And I know it was touched on briefly by Dr. Cole, but they're doing a great job over at the Meadowwood Housing. They've gotten ahead of pace on 2 of the buildings, bumped it up a couple weeks on one of the buildings on when they're hoping their end date is. One of the buildings is supposed to be finishing sometime maybe in June, and the other is in the end of August or early September. So it seems like it's really going on pace there to get all that housing done.
Director After.
Thanks. I'll be at the Carbondale Library on Martin Luther King Day, Monday, the 15th at 5 p.m. Pending confirmation that it's open, which I think it is. And looking forward to hearing from folks in the district about their thoughts on the superintendent search and process.
And I will be at the Starbucks in Willits on Friday, the 19th at 9 a.m. And then also just reminding the public that they can always submit comments either through the public comment link or emailing us directly, knowing that hours and schedules don't work out for everyone. And that we are pretty responsive to emails. We'll get right back to you. We're always open to have discussions, and we always make time to have those conversations with community. My only other general update is that Legislative Review Committee through CASB starts back up this Friday as we head into our next legislative session. And I would encourage board and public and staff, everyone, to keep an eye on what's going on in the legislature. There are some lofty goals of fully funding education this year. So we'll see how close we get and keep our thumb on what's going on and what laws are being pushed through. We also wanted to take a moment to update the public on superintendent housing next steps. And this is really just a general update piggybacking off of the update that went out in August. So we've talked to staff multiple times about engaging to purchase a home. And at this point, staff is taking action on that. They're working towards being able to bring us some recommendations to purchase a home for a superintendent or district leadership. There will be a press release going out tomorrow regarding that. And if anybody else on the board has comments on this topic, feel free to chime in. But we've spent 2 years now, almost 2 years on this topic. And I think working with the task force, working through and around and over all of the bumps that we've hit, we feel comfortable and confident moving forward in this direction. And we know that it will set us up as we head into this next search to be able to really attract and retain a highly qualified leader. So.
Yeah, and just a thank you to the Superintendent Housing Task Force. Even though they met a while ago, we're still relying on their insight and appreciate the time that those community members gave to give us a thorough perspective on what we most value.
And just to mention also that a thank you to the task force, and that their recommendation from the task force was unanimous that we did need to do something towards superintendent housing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a good point to bring up, Director Tytler, that all of the members of the task force that looked closely at this issue, the way that the board has and did, all agreed that we had to come up with a solution. And so identifying a solution and moving forward, I think is the appropriate step at this point.
And then one of the options was, there was a vote on what types of steps should be taken. One of the options was doing nothing towards superintendent housing, and there was no votes from the task force towards that.
Any other comments? Okay, so we will move on to our final agenda item, which is appreciations, and we are back to Director After to start, or sorry, to Brady's to start.
I started last.
You did? Oh.
That's fine. I would like to appreciate,
It goes around.
that's fine.
Director
I'm
Ramirez,
happy
start
to
the
jump
bus.
in. Okay. I need to go ahead and appreciate all of the teachers who have rejoined us after break. And I hope that their breaks were restful, and I appreciate that we have such enthusiastic leadership in our district, in our building level, getting these updates from principals and from classroom teachers so that it's just easy for me to picture where my kid's going to be, what they're doing, who they're talking to, and what I can ask them about when they come home and tell me that their day was fine. So just appreciating that effort that it takes to do the little bit extra push and help me to engage with my students in the classroom, even when I'm not there.
Director Tyler.
I would like to say thank you to all the IBB members who have formed different committees, and there's I think 4 or 5 different committees meeting pretty much on a weekly basis, once a week for the next couple months to get final recommendations done for the interests that were defined. And it's just a big workload for them to commit once a week to doing these things for the entire district. So I wanted to say thank you to all the extra time and effort and commitment that is being done by the IBB committee members. And I would also like to thank students at the high school level. This has been a really big push for seniors this time of year with all the applications that are due for college and all the extra work for, like, January 1st was a big deadline for so many students for getting their applications in. And in addition to that, to all of the teachers who end up writing gobs of letters of recommendation this time of year for those students, thank you for also the extra time that takes and the support of the students that is indispensable. So thank you.
Director After.
Before the break, I had the opportunity to visit Riverview and meet with the leadership there. So thanks so much to the excellent leadership in the building, and then the district office staff who also went on the visit. I had a great experience and was really blown away by the quality of the school and the folks I talked to and the classrooms I saw. So thanks so much for the thoughtful presentation to that great school. Thanks also to the district staff and school staff who are working hard to prioritize our school and student health with the exploration, the drug forums that are coming up next week. I'm going to try to attend one of those and looking forward to the conversation. I think it's really important. So I'm glad that the team here is being proactive and prepping for that. And then thanks also to the staff, Chief Markham and team who led us through the meeting on Monday on the mill levy certification. We've quickly moved on from that, but it was an important consequential meeting, and I'm glad that we were well prepared and were able to do that quickly. That's all.
Director Ramirez.
I think the one sentiment I heard for break, once families started going back to work on the 2nd and 3rd, up until the 8th, was that we really wanted our kids back in school. And I just want to appreciate all the teachers, all the staff, all the aides, all the secretaries, everybody who sustains our schools, our custodians, our lunch ladies, everyone who takes the time to help our schools run. Thank you guys, including our bus drivers, because they were truly missed over break. And I think that was a sentiment that families and parents, like, I think at one point someone said, how did we survive the pandemic? It's really hard. So I don't think we can ever not appreciate enough leaders in our district, and really the educators across so many different departments who touch the lives of our district students. So thank you to everyone who works for the school district.
Thank you. I just have a couple. I wanted to give a thanks to everyone that's working on our calendar committee this year. This is a calendar approval year, and I'm sure you all are getting hit with the same questions that I am of when's the calendar coming out? And I wish it was this, or I wish it was that. And that committee has a very difficult job of creating a calendar that not only meets all of the educational requirements, but satisfies parents and teachers and the needs of other staff. And so a special thanks to them because they walk a tight line. And, I'm looking forward to getting that done, and I'm sure they are too. I also wanted to give a shout out to specials teachers in all of our schools. My kids going back to school this week knew their rotating specials schedule before I even pulled out the calendar. And it just reminded me how those small blocks of time are so impactful for our kids. And those are teachers who are so committed and who touch so many kids every week in all of the schools. And so I wanted to give them a special thanks. And then the last one I had is for our transportation teams. We're heading into snowy weather. I'm sure that today was already one of those days, and I know that they're up bright and early and making sure that everybody is arriving safe. And so giving a special thanks to them this time of year. And that is all I have. So if there is no further business and no objection, this meeting will be adjourned. It is 7:55 p.m.